I'm Masha Mimran. I'm on the editorial board of the Quarterly, and I'm having the great pleasure of interviewing my friend, Joe Giardino, who wrote a beautiful, beautiful review of this particular book entitled Negative Hallucinosis in Bion's Theory of Transformations by Rodrigo Barahona. It's a great pleasure to be with you on Zoom today, Joe, and again, to have this little conversation together.
Yes, very good to see you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. So I just thought, I read your review, which is so sensitively done and so beautiful, and brought to mind really so many thoughts about psychoanalysis theory, but of course our clinical work as well. And of course, it made me want to read the book. So I think my first kind of question or thought to you, Joe, is I know that you're an avid reader of Bion, and in fact, you do teach Bion at the NYU postdoctoral program in psychoanalysis. So I guess my first question to you is, can you just share with us a little bit of your own experience of what it was to be reading Barona's book?
Well, I mean, Rodrigo's book was really, phenomenal kind of experience in itself. So if we're talking about, getting in touch with experience, I really think I felt touched by the way he writes. He's very evocative and can really help you get into his material, and also theoretically so rich. So I think he has a way of consolidating very dense and complicated ideas into very digestible forms and very easy to follow. So for me, it was a real pleasure, and it touched on a lot of things that I think are so germane to the types of patients that we see now, and or at least I have felt to be treating throughout most of my career, and I think to be able to have ways of conceptualizing what's happening, what's going on with very challenging patients, for instance. It's immensely helpful and clinically. So I thought Barahona was really a wonderful read and very accessible and very useful for people, anybody working with your typical kinds of patients that we see.
And we really see how engaged you're in this review and how much it resonated with you. So it's such a treat for me to have this conversation with
It's really a pleasure, and I think if you like Beyond, if it's really fascinating what Barona does with Green too, kind of reading Green and then going back to Beyond and back and forth, and you have like this real integration and reinterpretation through later theory. And I think that's about as rich as things can get when you start to you go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And he does so much of this in his thinking that it really helps to consolidate a whole lot.
Mm. Yes, it's, you're talking about this is, I want to ask you, is there something that stands out for you the most about this dialogue between Green and Beyond that Barahona puts in motion so evocatively in this book?
Yeah, well, okay. What's the most? I mean, there's so many elements, but I think the works, Green's work on the negative in particular, the work of the negative, and how Rodrigo really tries to connect this particular area to Beyond's work. And, sort of all the ways that there are so many elements that are unknowable in our contact with patients, and things that become extremely challenging or really just they evade representation. And so there are many ways that you have to find ways to, you have to find some way to survive the treatment and make contact with someone who struggles immensely to make and hang on to parts of themselves. And this is a challenge clinically. You could get wiped out in the transcripts. Everything could be eviscerated. You could feel really dead psychically. There's so many things can go on in a treatment where it's hard to make contact with someone who sort of does anything or needs to do anything to remove, evacuate, get rid of all the painful elements. And this is where Rodrigo really helps us to think about how do you stay with this kind of presentation? How do you survive it? How do you go on? I find it immensely helpful because this is where I think I see a lot of challenges. You could go on for years in a treatment, for instance, with someone who might have these types of limitations developmentally or lacking certain functions or capacity of mind. So it's very helpful to think about how do you make contact with someone? How do you really hold on to the trying to capture some sort of element of the experience with them and work with it?
Yeah, no, I really, appreciate what you're saying and how you're really bringing the theory and the complexity of the theory that is elaborated upon by Barahona and Bion and Green, of course, in a way that is just so naturally clinical in the way you put it. So I really appreciate that. And I know, from our work together, from our friendship, that you lead a lot of group supervision, for example, on trauma, and that you're interested in trauma and how patients process trauma, but also how clinicians process trauma in this kind of group setting. And I was wondering, I mean, you of course pointed this out already, but is there a particular example, something, maybe a little vignette that you can share with us or from your supervisees or that really resonated for you with your reading?
Well, I don't know if I could have time for a whole vignette, but I can tell you what a lot of my students struggle with is when a patient is so wordless, and you can imagine what happens when someone's been severely traumatized, and I'm sure you've seen some or probably many, if they can't speak, if they can't find a way to represent what's happening or what's going on, or even feel a lot of times, how do you make contact? How do you engage? How do you work? It's a complex and extremely challenging issue. Because we can't. I think Levine talks about this too. You might need more of. You might need a different type of engagement, or you're active in a different way. As in, you might need to lend certain functions of mind to be able to help the patient to be able to make some sort of encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Because trauma really has a way of sort of eviscerating meaning, wiping out, evacuating. All these things that help to get rid of it, wipe it out, and to really hold on to it, find a containing function is extremely challenging. So my students always talk about, but they didn't say anything. But there's, you have to work with their communication style, which may not include words a lot of times.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's really resonating, like you say, with our clinical work today. And it's, again, I really appreciate the way you put this, Joe, because it's so also resonating of, what we mean by contemporary Freudian, the kind of richness that psychoanalysis has to offer, always being attuned to different minds and different function of the mind. And I'm just thinking right now, of this quote actually from you as I was preparing for today from the review.
Oh, okay. I don't remember what I say, so go ahead.
That's why I'm here. So I would like to read it to you because I think it's directly related to what you point out, to this issue of function of the mind. And so you say, as a correlative function of the mind, he, Barahona, asserts that hallucinosis, positive and negative, is an essential capacity within the analyst as a means of accessing primitive mental states, those predating dreaming. And, when I read this quote, like for me, it really brings home what you're saying clinically. And I was just thinking, for some of us, like negative hallucinosis can be a little mystifying, you know, and perhaps positive hallucinosis as well. But here it transpires as a kind of necessary function of the mind or something like that. Is there?
Right, right. Yes, I hope I can explain it. Maybe I wrote it better than I can explain it. Let's see. What I recall was, I think in reading Rodrigo's book, he's trying to help us understand, that in the times of the wordlessness or what seems to be maybe even hallucinatory or delusional at times, these are extremely important functions, even if they uh, in large part are pathological many times, not always, but it's important consideration, especially when you're trying to figure out how to communicate with someone who doesn't have certain other capacities yet. And I think what would be the function of a hallucinosis? Well, I guess if you have going all the way back to Freud, we need some sort of uh, hallucinatory function, don't we? Hallucinatory wish fulfillment. We need some kind of hallucinatory function uh, to be able to either in the absence, in the gap, in the separation, put out there. Uh, Imagine, image, put into the mind something that can fill the space of the absence, and that is an important thing. It's a very important thing, and it's not a given. And what's the negative side? The negative side is very complicated, but I think what he's trying to tell us is that the mind does need to say no to certain things, and then Freud said that too in the negation paper, all the way toward the end of his career. The mind needs to be able to say no, and it can't tolerate the immense amount of stimulation that it would have to endure if it said, if it didn't have a way to put to the side certain certain things, make a judgment, put to the side certain things. And so it is an important thing. We wouldn't be able to be here and to function in our current exchange if we couldn't say no to certain things and exclude them from our very moment, our very discourse at the moment. Um, and we have to be able to do this.
Mm,
But it can go too far, is what Rodrigo is talking about, where if it's the capacity or lack thereof, we should say, to tolerate something that's too painful, if it's not there, the experience largely gets attacked and pushed out of the system, made to be removed, evacuated, gone, get rid of it, negativized, you might say. It's just totally,
uh-huh.
totally in a totalizing way. Get it out, get it out, get it out. Uh, this is like the organism can't handle it. It's too much. There's too much. It needs to be removed. So if this goes too far, you can imagine what happens in an individual. Uh, it's a very kind of insular experience. How do you open yourself to new to difference, to new exchange, to new interaction, to new relationship? How do you do it if you're really focused on preservation, self-preservation, and reducing pain, eliminating anything that's too much from your system? Uh, this is a challenge. So it can go too far, and the negativizing effect, as Rodrigo really talks about in the book, can become so limiting in terms of the patient's ability to grow, to adapt to reality, to be able to keep keep developing.
Yeah, and I think it's just, I mean, so clear here, but also, so beautiful how you say it predates dreaming, right? Because dreaming is already a testament to a certain capacity of the mind, right? So that this really predates dreaming. I love that ending of that sentence. I think it really crystallizes so well, what you're saying here, Joe.
Well, I think in Barahona, Rodrigo, I don't know how he would manage this, but I do think that in some capacity, I can't remember where he mentions in the book, but uh, if we are trying to help people reach this ability, you'll see in the transference how these how people start to have these little developments, little movements, and one of them is you might start to see that someone who really couldn't dream, who really couldn't imagine in the same way, who maybe only had nightmares, something else can start to emerge by having this exchange of minds, by you having a containing function for all the negativity, all of the pain, and all the things that were not containable previously. If they find a way into you as therapists, as analysts, you may be able to help somebody really start to have, even just little by little, start to dream. Your ability to dream and have reverie in the session, for instance, is going to be instrumental, in spite of all the negativity, all the attacks on your function, on your ability to integrate information, integrate affect, thought and affect. All the things that we try to help people with. Your ability to hold on to those and really in spite of all all the things that are going on in the patient who maybe not does not yet have it, if you can do some of those things, then you might see something else emerge. Your dreaming capacity becomes an opening for the patient.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and it's true that, well, of course, as Freudian, we think, dream analysis, but that in itself is a developmental achievement, you're saying.
I would think so. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's not a given, especially if this hasn't been yet available to somebody. Yeah.
I think it's so valuable to be listening to you and to be reminded of this, as clinicians, and how do we access that potentiality, for in our work and for our patients. And of course, as I'm listening to you, I keep thinking Freud, and we'll get to some of these thoughts, because I thought your review, in so many ways, is so Freudian, but I'm leaving this for a little later in this conversation. I just thought, since we're talking about dreams, symbolization in many ways, or the lack thereof of symbolization, what came to mind also is this book cover. Can you
Yeah,
see it?
the poppy fields. Yeah.
Poppy fields, yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'm just thinking, in this image, in my mind, it contains theoretically and clinically so many of the treasures of the book, especially, I think, the idea of transformation, or the
Right, right.
capacity to transform. So I was just wondering about your
My
thoughts.
thoughts. So, well, yeah, I would say I think Rodrigo's creativity really emerges with this in this area, because he's taking an idea from Bion in his book Transformations, and trying to capture the O of the session. So you'll have to read the chapter to get into all the details, but there's something really unknowable that you can't get, you can't describe it, you can't thoroughly or fully represent it. You just won't be able to, and there's something that you might be able to capture, you might just get a little contact with its essence. something like this. So you have a little bit of contact with something that makes has an impact on your being and how you are, not what they're, not the contents, not this is Freud was getting to the in the archaeological model, going back and uncovering unconscious content, returning from the repressed material. Repressed material can come back into conscious awareness, and we make contact with it again. Beyond's whole area is putting us in touch with something else, and negative capability, being able to tolerate the uncertainty, being able to really sit through that which is completely it's not knowable, it's not, but you might hit little areas of the emotional experience that can transform in that very moment. And so Rodrigo, what's he doing? You got to read his book because it's wonderful. But he's taking the poppy field example, and I think he takes a look at what he kind of plays around with this image from the book, and he starts to talk about Bion's wartime experiences, and that's where this is Rodrigo's play. It's really a play with Bion's work, and he's very clear. He's clearly really read Bion. Like he's got such an in-depth analysis of the death of this one. Private Sweeney was the individual, but Bion struggled apparently his whole life with trying to make some kind of sense of what happened while he was on the battlefields in World War One. And so Rodrigo accounts this one death of a particular private that was he was with, Bion was with, and how Bion how his work shifts ever so slightly as he's writing about it through the years. So if you read the chapter, it's really fascinating because Rodrigo has some fun play with, what might some of these little, nuances, these little tweaks, what could they be? And he's suggesting perhaps that there's some kind of transformation going on in Bion himself, and his trying to work through the trauma of all the wartime experience, and what would in many cases seem to wipe out or eviscerate the meaning. He has a way of showing that Bion was little by little by little making a little room for tolerating having some kind of contact with this in a different way, the trauma of what he went through. So I think it's a lot of fun, and it's very creative. It's Rodrigo's own analysis, which is great, and he goes into so much depth. So if you don't know these particular works that he's talking about, he's going to cover them in a lot of detail.
Yeah, you're saying it's, I mean, and it's true, the book is very complex, but also very accessible.
Yeah.
So many clinical examples also that it's very grounding, I think, in terms of what he elaborates upon.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's was there any of those examples that struck you more than others, or?
Well, listen. I got to go back because they were so detailed. But I remember that what was interesting to me, some of Bion's earlier writings, for instance, Rodrigo shows that he was negatively hallucinating certain elements of the battlefield, like this path was part of the picture, but he wasn't seeing it. It's totally gone. This path is that was on the field is wiped out, and it's something about the emotional experience of perhaps the survivor's guilt he went through, having lost this person, this private, and feeling just horribly about what transpired, and the helplessness, and just the dread, nameless dread, as he called it. It was something unnameable about it. And so Rodrigo kind of shows that initially there's more of this negative hallucination where it's sort of wiped out. It's so much that you have to kind of close your eyes and not see it. And as he works through the different writings, he shows that there's a little bit of a different thing. Now he's got these poplar trees, and so he's trying to show us that there's a little tiny movement from this negative hallucination to something that might be reaching a transformation on the positive hallucinatory function, the positive hallucinosis. So he's able uh, to make a tiny bit of a hallucination. That's the poplar trees. And again, it's super complicated. So you got to read it, but the movements are fascinating because he really does take you through. You know, this is what it looks like here, and then look at this tiny little movement here, and then by the end of his life, look at this. And so you could see Rodrigo is he's using his own concepts to try to make some make some kind of understanding of this way that Bion was really traumatized by what he went through and how he was trying to work with it at different points. So you could see the developments.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was struck by that. I really thought that he was very careful in how he, little by little, shows what might have been going. It's all, this is really an exercise, I think, and he'll describe it like that, play along for a little bit. And I think that's part of the fun is that he's doing it to show that you can have some kind of, you don't have to know everything about it. It's about the process of being in it and seeing how it can evolve.
Yeah, and like you say, so minutely, you know. So I mean, so subtle in so many ways, but so many little psychic changes taking place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also thinking here, cases, clinical work, and one of the things that really struck me and that I thought was so smart of you, but I want to hear more from you, is your return towards the end of your review to patient zero, to Anna O. Patient zero, and in many ways, a return to Freud through Anna O and to Royer. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on your thinking there.
My thinking, I was having some fun too because I was teaching Freud. I teach at NIP, the National Institute for Psychotherapists. I think I was teaching. I don't know when I started this review. I can't remember, but I know I was maybe I was an early Freud. I don't know. At some point every year I go through the NO case, and that's the first time I remember negative hallucination in the analytic literature. So that's why it came to mind because that's the first time it's mentioned, and it was Breuer who mentions it because he writes it in his case, and so I thought of where was it first mentioned, and here it is. It's all the way back in NO. So some of this stuff goes way back, and notably, it's different from our sort of dissociation model, which I think is useful to understand because I think what Rodrigo's helping us to understand here is that the negative hallucinosis, negative hallucination itself, it's a different kind of concept, and it has a lot to do with with that drive and very Freudian, really wiping out and defeating, obliterating. So there's something very Freudian about that. I think it has a quality that helps us understand. It's not just like poof, one checks out and they're gone. There's a real active effort to remove and disavow and wipe out reality, stuff that's way too painful. You gotta get it out of there, get it out of your system, and that's it's an active process, really. Even though it seems like the person, if we use the dissociation terminology, it might sound different, but I think it's a very useful way of understanding some of these nuances, and I would like to see more of it. I mean, Green was really big on this. So he has it throughout his work. Um, I think it's extremely helpful to think about. And why NO? I mean, you could see from her, she had negative and positive hallucinations too. That's why I thought of her because she was negatively hallucinating. I think at one point Breuer brings in this. There's a consultant that comes in and they try to do something. I can't remember exactly what they were trying to treat one particular like ocular symptom or something, and they bring in this other person, and she can't see him. She scotomizes him. Gone.
Right. That's right.
They're
Yes.
totally gone. So she negatively hallucinates this. This. It's a stranger. She doesn't want this person. She wants Breuer. Why does she want Breuer? I'm asking you now. Why does she want Breuer? Because Breuer's her analyst, of course. Breuer in that point, and that's how Freud's discovering transference and understanding. This is our first discovery transference. So you can't just bring in a substitute. You can't bring in a substitute. So she negatively hallucinates him. So I think it's a fascinating kind of thing. And then she has more these other kinds of positive hallucinations that she experiences in the case, which you can go back to it or read this review and I talk a little bit about it. But I thought it was fascinating because it's the very point at which she can no longer see. Gone.
Yeah.
Oof. Too painful. Too painful to cut the tie. I'd rather cut it entirely than lose the contact with the object.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No. That's why. I mean, I thought it was absolutely brilliant that you brought in Anao with, and you said, the case contains so much of what Rodrigo writes about, and so much of what you discuss in this review, Joe. So I was kind of blown away when I was like, Anao. So I
Well, I
also
love those early cases. Those studies in Historia. They're a lot of fun.
they're fabulous. I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote my dissertation in my other career in literature on hysteria.
Oh, great. I'll
So
have to read it.
yeah, yes, why not if you want? So it was yeah, it was just I was just so delighted to read this. Um, and then the other thing is, well, there's a quote I really liked from Rodrigo that I thought we could read together.
Oh, okay. Remind me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read it and you can comment on it if you want. I mean, in many ways, I think it mirrors a lot, what you just said, Joe. But so yeah, so he says, I think it's on page 95. He says transformations in negative hallucinosis has to do with all the ways the subject unknows their emotional experience by psychically disarticulating the elements that link this experience with common reality, transforming it in turn into an incomprehensible yet lived in other reality, which then begins operating by its own rules. And the reason why that quote came to mind is I think this is sort of exactly what you're telling us with the case of Anao, and you don't use the word disarticulating. It was more like the evacuation. But it just reminded me of that moment in Rodrigo's book.
Well, I mean, it's a great quote. I like it. I think he's talking about something very important about what happens, how someone will go so far to evade the contact with the most difficult part, and how just how. And this is why I was saying that it can be a very active process. It's not just like the person uh, shorts, just checks out or something. It's an active attempt to really wipe it out and remove it and get it out and not tie it together with meaning or having some sort of way of holding on to it,
Mm.
representing it, if you will, putting it back. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And that brings us back to the pre-dreaming, and the the mental functioning and the pre-dreaming and what is representation and when is representation symbolization possible. So in some ways it's bringing us back to the beginning. um, and speaking of beginning and ending, I mean, we're about to end this time together for the quarterly, but certainly not our conversations about your work on Beyond and this review, Joe. So I'll end with that, which is kind of serious and cheeky in some ways. Is if I think about everything that you told me today and your return to Anao and Rodrigo's book, are we, us Freudians, are we all kind of Bionians?
Oh wow, that's a question. I don't know. I'm not really big on these kinds of categories because I feel very. I think Beyond's beyond this. The Beyond's his own kind of analyst, and I think he uses a lot of Freud though, and Klein, but he's beyond. He's beyond. So I don't know. I'm sort of resist the categorizations that sometimes historically we've been so uh, joined with. But I do think Bion has a lot to offer, and especially the theory of thinking. It's right out of it's a development and an extension of Freud's two principles of mental functioning. I mean, it's an extension of Freudian model, and so I don't think that you could. I mean, Bion does cite Freud too. It's not he does cite these papers. There's other things he doesn't cite as extensively, but you get a lot of Freud in and beyond. And as a Freudian, you could use a lot of beyond to understand Freud. I don't know if I made any sense, but I think you could use. I think you could make the case that beyond could help you understand Freud better, and Freud could help you understand beyond better. And there's a backwards and forwards that I love about analytic theory, that you got to read a lot, and you got to go back to Freud I think we all need Freud to help us understand how these models emerged, and Bion tried to extend to a place that was beyond the archaeological model that was limiting when we treat many patients who are really not in this neurotic territory, that they're another kind of characterological level or psychotic level, and that's the norm in practice. So I think that we could use a lot of Bion, and Bion can help us understand Freud, and Freud could be part of the conversation too, all the time.
And yes, I mean, that's a great way to put it. And he is part of the conversation all the time. It's a great way to think about it. And we often have these conversations, you and I, about Lowell.
That's and you teach the Lowell course at postdoc, so
I'm not the one being interviewed today.
Oh, okay. Another time.
Another time, yeah. So it's pretty clear that we're all very encouraged to read Rodrigo's book, and we're all very encouraged to read your review, Joe. Is there anything else you want to share with us? You want to talk about?
I think just thank you for the time. It was, it could be it could be very interesting to have a conversation after you do these kind of in isolation, writing something, and now having a little chance to work on it with you. I think that's part of it. So thank you for having a little time with me today.
Well, thank you. I mean, I so appreciate this opportunity, and it's always great to see you. So thank you so much, and thank you for this time together.
Okay, likewise, and I guess I'll see you later, literally later.
And I'll see you. Yes, exactly. Yes.